Okay, guys, so this is going to be an all-new series of videos we're doing on this channel titled Survival Stories. If you're new to the channel, this channel is called Tough Teens, and on this channel we talk about the troubled teen industry, teen boot camps, teen behavior modification programs or behavior modification schools. I'll probably even get into some wilderness boot camps, military schools, things like that. Big focus of this channel is going to be on the WASP program, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs. That seems to be one of the largest and most well-known programs out there. And also the fairly recent Netflix documentary, The Program, which kind of brought these programs to national attention or to the general public, was about the WASP program. So in today's story, which is going to be the first of a series of stories, this is going to be the survivor testimony of Bill Boyles, who spent time in Paradise Cove in Samoa, as well as Casa By The Sea in Ensenada, Mexico. And this story is going to be titled Troubled in Paradise. And you'll have to excuse me if I kind of trip over my words a bit. I've been having some audio problems recording these. So this is probably about the third time I've recorded this story, going through the entire thing, reading for about 15, 20 minutes, making the video, and then realizing that the audio winds up cutting off early on. So without further ado, early one morning when I was 14 years old, 3 men burst into my room and shook me awake. They handcuffed me, dragged me outside, and put me in the back of a rental car, and so began a journey for me that would span half the globe and last 2.5 years. I spent 22 months in WASP Paradise Cove, an all-boy program in Western Samoa, and 8 months in Casa By The Sea, another WASP program located in Ensenada, Mexico. I was also briefly held at Brightway Youth Hospital in St. George, Utah. A WASP program ran for the purpose of evaluating its new students before sending them to their more permanent programs. And when I was in the program, I either never went to this place or it didn't exist. I went straight to Spring Creek Lodge in Thompson Falls, Montana. Well, these programs were different with dissimilar campuses located in different countries and with different staff. They all had a few major things in common. Their strict, sometimes harsh, and occasionally brutal system of rules and punishment, their so-called seminars, and their consistent neglect and mistreatment of the youth entrusted to their care. While I was being held in their programs, I had a chance to experience all of these things firsthand. It is my goal to give a brief sketch of what life was like in these programs. Paradise Cove was for me like waking up from a nightmare only to discover that it's all too real. The food was terrible by any standards. Not only was it not balanced or nutritious, it was often spoiled, cooked improperly, or tainted. Due to the poor food, I lost over 120 pounds, 60 alone in the first 2 months. Suffering from the poor nutrition, my body began to break out in boils, and like almost all the boys there, any cut I received would immediately become infected and begin to ulcerate. Also contributing to this was the unsanitary living conditions. Flies fed on the rotting food slops and then landed on our cuts, often in such thick numbers that it was impossible to swat them all. Many nights I would awaken in the dark to discover cockroaches crawling on my face or body. We had no hot water for showers. We were not given antibacterial soap. If we wanted it, it had to be sent from home. Scabies ran rampant, driven not by sexual contact, but by the cramped sleeping and living conditions. The bathrooms had no doors, and until a boy had achieved a certain level of points and trust, he was required to have a staff member watching him while he used them. The showers were open-sided, so nudity in them was not permitted. Instead, we showered while wearing a pair of shorts. The water flowed from one stall down to the next, eventually discharging directly into the ocean, where we were forced to swim every day. As a side note, the septic tank and the sinks also ran into the ocean. The facility was not walled, but instead surrounded by a tall cliff that functioned more effectively than any wall. Only one small path ran down the side of the cliff face, meaning that any supplies such as food, water, or building supplies had to be carried down on someone's back. That someone was nearly always a student. The staff used us as a free source of labor. We hauled, scrubbed, weeded, carried rocks, and did whatever else they decided needed to be done. Well, this was just a quick glimpse at the neglect in Paradise Cove and does not really even begin to cover what went on. I want to go ahead and move on to the rules in the interest of time. The rules, as I mentioned before, were extremely strict, and punishment could be exceedingly harsh. The rules manual I was shown the first day was 4 or 5 pages long, and the rules were divided into 5 categories by the seriousness of the offense and thus the resulting punishment. Category 5 being the worst, Cat 1 offenses, including things such as talking out of turn, sarcasm, swearing, and also included some pointless and ambiguous offenses such as burping without permission, making facial expressions, and nonverbal communication, meaning any hand gestures or sign language, pointed looks, etc. Cat 1 consequences weren't a big deal, but were enough of them could land you in more trouble. Cat 2 and higher offenses got you sent to the worksheet room, a larger hut where you sat cross-legged on the ground with your hands on your head and listened to hour-long tapes of things such as The Life of Henry Ford or the symphonies of Mozart. Any of you guys who spent time in a program probably experienced some Zig Ziglar or Tony Robbins tapes as well. And as an interesting side fact, Tony Robbins' son actually spent time at Spring Creek Lodge, where I spent my time. Back into the story, after the tape ended, you were required to pass a quiz about the tape in order to get credit for it. After you collected a certain number of credits, varying by level of offense, you could leave and go back to your group. Every 2 or 3 hours, everyone in the worksheet room was required to do an hour-long set of brutal calisthenics called skills by way of additional punishment. This form of punishment was used often. Failure to complete the required push-ups, sit-ups, etc., even if the failure was physical, resulted in a Category 3 offense. Category 3 and higher offenses carried additional punishments of losing levels in the program and required time in the isolation room, or ISO as we called it. It was a hut with 3 4-foot by 4-foot stalls, concrete floors, and a tin roof. Each stall could be closed off completely with the use of Dutch doors. Cat 3 meant 1 day in ISO minimum, Cat 4 2 days, and Cat 3 5 days minimum. Cat 4 offenses included making plans to run away, masturbation. Cat 5 offenses included self-inflicted injuries, being physically out of control, and running away. Boys in ISO were required to sit cross-legged with their hands on their head. Failure to do so occasionally resulted in being hogtied. They were given water twice a day, allowed to use the bathroom once, and fed once or twice. The meals were a glass of water and a bowl of white rice, which were left out so that the water would warm and the rice would cool to room temperature. The ISO box got very hot because of being enclosed with no windows and having a tin roof. Boys often came out covered in scabies or fungal rashes. Fungal rashes and scabies were treated by applying an acidic solution to the affected region, generally your groin, to literally burn the skin off. Needless to say, it was painful, and after returning to America, I found out most rashes and scabies could be easily treated with a topical cream. I won't go further into the medical treatment for reasons I mentioned before, except to say there was no doctor on site. In fact, no doctor within an hour's drive of the facility, and I never saw any proof a nurse was trained or licensed for that job in any way, nor did I ever see any reason to think they were. In all seriousness, living in Samoa was like living in a page out of Lord of the Flies. Fights, beatings, stabbings, drug use, corruption by the staff, abuse, dirt, sickness, and neglect were widespread and common. Every day was a struggle to survive, to keep your head above water, to keep moving forward towards getting out. But perhaps the worst part of all was that in Samoa, as in all WASP programs, you never knew how long it would take to get out. We were denied what even the worst criminal in jail has: a date, a goal to look forward to, a motivation to keep on going. The only thing I can say about Paradise Cove is thankfully it was shut down by the Samoan government shortly after I left. After I left Paradise Cove, I went to Casa by the Sea in Ensenada, Mexico. I spent 8 months there. While I've heard many complaints about Casa, and most are valid by any reasonable standard to me, after Paradise Cove, Casa was a dream come true. There we had real mattresses to lay on the floor instead of bedrolls. Even though the buildings weren't heated, at least we slept inside. There was hot water if you showered early enough, and the food was, if not good, at least edible, and I managed to start gaining weight back. The worst part of Casa by the Sea to me were the fact that you had to speak Spanish all the time, and I knew none, and the Americans who ran the facility. The program was owned by Dace Goulding, who was educational director at Paradise Cove, and co-directed by Jason Finlayson, who went on to own and direct Academy at Ivy Ridge, and Jade Robinson, who now owns and runs Horizon Academy. My biggest problems were with Jason. He was very rude and cruel. He would often pretend to drop me in levels just to see if I would get upset, or would call me in and claim he knew I was doing something against the rules and give me an opportunity to confess just to see if I would confess to something I was actually doing wrong. His favorite game note was to call upper levels out and make us run up a mountain across the street from the facility. If you didn't make it up the mountain in a certain amount of time, you got dropped levels. The exact rules of this game varied, but it was always clear he just wanted to see people get upset. In Casa, the isolation room was euphemistically called R&R. It was similar to Paradise Cove, but instead of a small stall, it was a room with a tile floor empty of furniture. Students were required to lie on the floor on their stomachs with their arms crossed behind their ankles and their ankles crossed, or they were required to kneel down with their arms and ankles crossed and were made to rest their entire weight on their crossed ankles. If you don't think this sounds painful, or even if you do, I encourage you to try this out yourself and then try to imagine what hours or days felt like in that position. As in Samoa, failure to comply in the isolation room brought on being restrained, which is generally another euphemism for being beaten, sometimes with fists and feet, sometimes with sticks, chairs, or other objects. School in Casa was essentially the same as in Samoa, a large room where students sat and worked. You would check out a workbook and then read the chapter until you felt you had it down pat. Then you would go to the teacher and ask for the test on that chapter. You would take it and would be graded later that day or the next day. If you didn't get at least an 80, you had to do it over. Teachers weren't really teachers. Really, they were more like monitors or proctors. They're merely to hand out tests and make sure no one cheated. School went at your own pace. There were several times in Samoa where I completed an entire credit in a day. There were also times when I pretended to work and just read a book instead, getting nothing done for months. Still, I ended up nearly a year and a half ahead of my class, and I didn't graduate solely because I wanted to experience at least 1 year of high school. However, I was in for a rude awakening. I had trouble getting credit for many of the classes because the accreditation of WASP was questionable. I actually ended up not only ahead, but behind in my class and had to take summer school to catch up. Finally, I got frustrated retaking classes and dropped out and got my GED. Eventually, after nearly 30 months to the day, I graduated the program and was allowed to come home. The program encourages parents to make students sign and follow a quote-unquote home contract, a strict list of rules detailing the students' requirements they must fulfill to be allowed to come home and be part of the family. Mine included attending church twice a week, a list of chores, what music, movies, and video games I would and wouldn't be allowed to listen to, watch, or play, and who I could be friends with and who I couldn't, and what activities in which I could be involved. The program encourages parents whose children do not follow their home contract or children who turn 18 and choose to leave the program to be excluded from the family, to be allowed no contact and never be spoken to again. It is seen as a way of discouraging slipping back into bad habits. WASP also offers a guarantee that if you are not satisfied with the final product, you may return it and it will be replaced. In other words, you may send your student back for free if they slip back. Needless to say, they are much worse to you the second time, although many kids simply run away to avoid being sent back. I slept with a knife under my pillow until I turned 18. I would never have allowed myself to be sent back, whatever it took. I had a close friend in Samoa named Corey Murphy. One day, his mother told him she was sending him back to the program. He went to his room and shot himself. I left the program, but in many ways, the program has never left me. I still have nightmares, perhaps once a week, where I dream I am back in the program. Sometimes it takes me a long time to come back to where I am and realize I'm not back there. The nightmares are never of the time I spent there, only of going back. I left 7 years ago this April, and the memories still haunt me. Things can get tense between my parents and I. Well, my father has apologized for sending me. My mother never has, and perhaps she never will. That may be the worst of all of this. Parents scared for their kids have their own love of their children used against them, twisted into paranoia until they feel their children are a such mortal danger that they have no other option but to send their children away to be cared for by complete strangers in a place they've never seen. I've seen it all firsthand. I lived it. It's terrible, but it's real. And until something is done, it will continue happening to thousands or tens of thousands of American teens every year. Let's be part of the solution, not part of the problem.